An unexpected letter arrives at Lewis Hamilton's Monaco apartment, threatening to reopen wounds from the most bitter rivalry in modern Formula One history. After years of silence between the seven-time world champion and his former teammate Nico Rosberg, a handwritten confession forces Lewis to confront the painful truth about their broken friendship and the controversial 2016 season. What begins with anger and reluctance leads to an emotional journey that neither driver could have predicted, one that will leave fans around the world in tears. Lewis Hamilton sighed as he sank into his favorite chair. The leather felt cool against his tired muscles. Through the wide windows of his Monaco apartment, the Mediterranean Sea sparkled in the late afternoon sun. Monaco had been his home for years now. He loved the peace it gave him, far from the roar of engines and crowds. Mails. "Here," said Mariah, his assistant. She placed a small stack on the glass coffee table. "Nothing urgent, but there's one with no return address. Looks personal." Lewis nodded his thanks as Mariah left the room. He was tired after 3 days of testing at Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. The new Mercedes had shown promise, but they still had work to do before the next race. At 40, Lewis felt every lap in his bones these days. 20 years in Formula One had taken its toll, even with his strict fitness routine. He flipped through the mail: team documents, a charity invitation, fan mail, which somehow still found its way to his personal address. At the bottom of the EE pile was a thick cream envelope. No return address, just his name and address written in neat handwriting. Not typed, but written by hand. Something about the handwriting seemed familiar. Lewis turned the envelope over and opened it. Inside was a letter written on expensive stationery. His eyes moved to the signature at the bottom, and his heart skipped a beat. Nico Rosberg. His hands began to shake slightly. He hadn't spoken to Nico in years. Not really spoken, beyond brief, polite exchanges at F1 events where their paths occasionally crossed. The letter began. "Lewis, after 15 years, I need to finally tell you the truth." Lewis quickly folded the paper and shoved it back into the envelope. His pulse raced as if he were in qualifying. Why would Nico write to him now? Their rivalry had ended in 2016 when Nico won the championship and then shocked everyone by retiring immediately afterward. That was nearly a decade ago. Lewis got up and walked to the window. Below, expensive yachts bobbed in the harbor. He could see the famous hairpin turn of the Monaco Grand Prix circuit from here. How many times had he and Nico raced each other around these streets? The memories came flooding back, unwanted and vivid. They had once been friends, best friends even. As teenagers racing karts, they had shared dreams, hotel rooms, and secrets. Then came Formula One, becoming teammates at Mercedes, and everything changed. The friendship dissolved under the pressure of competing for world championships. There had been accusations, crashes, and bitter words. By the end, they barely spoke, divided by a wall of engineers in the same garage. "Why now?" Lewis muttered, turning the envelope over in his hands. He had moved on. He had won more championships, broken all of Michael Schumacher's records, become a voice for diversity in the sport, and started planning for life after racing. What could Nico possibly have to say that mattered anymore? His phone buzzed. A text from his brother Nicholas. "Great testing times. Angela said you looked strong out there." Lewis smiled. His brother always kept track of his testing times, just as he had since Lewis was 8 years old, racing remote control cars. Family had kept him grounded through all the fame, money, and pressure. He glanced at the letter again. Part of him wanted to throw it away unread. Another part burned with curiosity. "Lewis, after 15 years, I need to finally tell you the truth." "What truth?" "The Monaco qualifying incident in 2014, when Nico had supposedly made a mistake that secured him pole position? The team orders he had ignored? The crashes that had cost Lewis points?" Lewis tossed the letter onto the coffee table and walked to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. Through the doorway, he could see the letter waiting for him. It seemed to grow larger in his mind, taking up more space than it should. His dog Roscoe waddled into the room, bulldog face looking up expectantly. "Not now, buddy," Lewis said, patting the dog's head. "Daddy's thinking." The sun was setting now, painting the sea with streaks of orange and pink. Lewis had plans to meet friends for dinner at his favorite vegan restaurant in Monte Carlo. He should get ready. The letter could wait. Maybe forever. But as he walked toward his bedroom, he found himself stopping at the coffee table again. He picked up the letter and unfolded it, reading a bit further this time. "The rivalry between us became something I never intended. There are things that happened, things I did, that you deserve to know about." Lewis folded it again. Whatever confession Nico wanted to make, Lewis wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Those years had been the hardest of his career. The betrayal of their friendship had hurt more than losing the 2016 championship. His phone buzzed again. Toto Wolff, still the team principal at Mercedes after all these years. "Good work today. Call me tomorrow to discuss the suspension adjustments." Lewis texted back a quick reply. Toto had managed the impossible task of keeping the peace between two drivers who grew to despise each other. He wondered if Toto knew about this letter. Roscoe nudged his leg, reminding Lewis that it was nearly dinner time for both of them. "All right, boy," Lewis said, putting the letter back on the table. "Food first, mysteries later." He prepared Roscoe's dinner and set it down. As the dog happily munched away, Lewis stared at the envelope. Why would Nico reach out now, in 2025, when both had moved on with their lives? Lewis had nothing to say to him. The time for explanations had passed years ago, and yet he found himself picking up the letter again, running his finger over the handwriting. There had been a time when he could read Nico's moods just by the way he walked into a room. They had been that close. Brothers, in all but blood, until they weren't. Lewis placed the letter in the drawer of his bedside table. He would decide what to do with it tomorrow. Tonight, he would enjoy dinner with friends, maybe watch the sunset from the restaurant terrace, and try not to think about the past. But as he showered and dressed, phrases from the letter kept echoing in his mind. "After 15 years, I need to finally tell you the truth. Things I did that you deserve to know about." By the time Lewis left his apartment, the letter safely hidden away, he knew he wouldn't be able to ignore it for long. Whatever Nico had to say, after all this time, must be important. The question was, did Lewis want to reopen old wounds just when they had finally healed? That night, Lewis barely tasted his dinner. His friends noticed his distraction, but blamed it on race testing. When he returned home, the letter seemed to call to him from the bedside drawer. He tried to sleep, but memories kept him awake. Memories of a friendship long before it became a rivalry. Lewis got up, opened the drawer, and took out the letter. Instead of reading more, he found himself remembering how it all began. It was 1999, and 13-year-old Lewis stood nervously at the European Karting Championship. He had worked so hard to get there. His dad, Anthony, had taken extra jobs to pay for his racing. They didn't have the money that other families had. His kart was second-hand, his race suit patched in places. "You're Lewis Hamilton, right?" a voice asked in English with a slight accent. Lewis turned to see a blond boy about his age, wearing a new race suit with fancy logos. "Yeah, that's me," Lewis replied cautiously. "I'm Nico Rosberg. I saw your race in Parma last month. That move in the third corner was amazing." Lewis couldn't help smiling. "Thanks. Your dad was Formula One world champion, wasn't he?" Nico nodded. "In 1982. But I'm trying to make my own way, you know?" Something about Nico's honesty made Lewis like him immediately. By the end of the weekend, they were friends. They talked about everything: racing lines, kart setups, and their shared dream of reaching Formula One someday. "We might be teammates," Nico had said excitedly as they shared a pizza after the final race. "Or rivals," Lewis had joked. "Even if we're rivals, we'll still be friends," Nico had promised. "Nothing will change that." Lewis smiled bitterly at the EG memory. How little they had known back then. Over the next few years, their friendship grew stronger. They traveled the junior racing circuit together, often staying at each other's houses to save money. Lewis visited Nico's family in Monaco and was amazed by their beautiful home overlooking the sea, the same view he now had from his own apartment. Nico stayed with Lewis's family in their modest house in Stevenage, England, sleeping on a mattress on Lewis's bedroom floor. They were opposites in many ways. Nico spoke 5 languages and had grown up in luxury. Lewis came from a working-class family and had faced racism throughout his young life. But on the track, they spoke the same language. They pushed each other to be better, celebrated each other's victories, and consoled each other after defeats. Lewis remembered one night in Italy when they were both 15. They sat on a hotel balcony, looking at the stars after a day of racing. "Promise me something," Nico had said suddenly. "What?" "No matter what happens when we make it to Formula One, we'll always be honest with each other. No games, no politics. Just honest. I promise," Lewis had said, and they had shaken hands solemnly. Their paths diverged as they grew older. Lewis joined the McLaren Young Driver program, his future secured by the team's support. Nico followed a different route through the racing ranks. They saw each other less often but remained close, calling and texting regularly. In 2006, Lewis won the GP2 championship, the stepping stone to Formula One. Nico was already in F1 with the Williams team. When Lewis was announced as a McLaren driver, for 2007, Nico was the first person he called. "We made it!" Lewis had shouted into the phone. "We actually made it!" "I knew we would," Nico had replied. "2 kids from karting, now in Formula One. It's just the beginning." Lewis put down the letter and walked to his trophy cabinet. Among the Formula One trophies and championship medals was a small, tarnished karting trophy. He and Nico had won it, together in a team event when they were 14. On the bottom, in messy teenage handwriting, they had scratched their names and the words "Future F1 Champions." For 6 years, they raced in different teams, remaining friends despite competing against each other. They'd meet for dinner during race weekends, playing video games in hotel rooms and talking about the future. Everything changed in 2013 when Lewis left McLaren to join Mercedes, Nico's team. Suddenly, they were driving the same car, with the same opportunity. No more excuses about one having better equipment than the other. The first year wasn't too bad. Mercedes wasn't winning regularly yet, so the pressure was lower. They still had dinners together sometimes, still joked in the garage. There were glimpses of their old friendship. Then came 2014. Mercedes built a car far better than any other. Teams. Suddenly, it wasn't about finishing in the points or getting an occasional podium. It was about winning championships, and only one driver could win. Lewis remembered their first real falling out, Monaco 2014. Nico had secured pole position after making a mistake in qualifying that brought out yellow flags, forcing Lewis to slow down on his final lap. Lewis had been convinced it was deliberate. Nico denied it. The trust between them cracked. Then there was the collision at Spa that same year. Racing wheel to wheel, they had touched. Lewis got a puncture and had to retire. Nico finished second. In the team meeting afterward, Nico admitted he could have avoided the contact, but chose not to make a point. Lewis had never felt so betrayed. The friend who had promised honesty had admitted to causing a crash deliberately. Something broke between them that day. Perhaps the last real thread of their friendship. Lewis closed his eyes, the memories almost too painful still. They had gone from sharing dreams as teenagers to barely looking at each other in the same garage. How had it gone so wrong? And more importantly, why did Nico want to revisit it now? Lewis looked at the letter again. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to protect himself from whatever Nico wanted to confess. But another part, the part that remembered the two boys sharing a pizza and dreaming of Formula One, needed to know. He unfolded the letter fully, ready to read more. His eyes scanned down to where he had stopped before. What happened in Monaco 2014 wasn't what you think. Lewis froze. After all these years, was Nico finally going to tell the truth about that day? His phone rang, startling him. It was his trainer, wanting to confirm tomorrow's workout. Lewis answered automatically, his mind still on the letter. After hanging up, he decided he needed to read it with a clear head. He placed it back in the drawer and forced himself to go to sleep. The next morning, Lewis went for a run along Monaco's harbor. The familiar route usually cleared his mind, but today memories of his time as Nico's teammate filled his thoughts. He remembered the excitement when he first joined Mercedes in 2013. Many people had questioned his decision to leave successful McLaren for a team that wasn't winning regularly. But Lewis had believed in Mercedes's potential. "We'll build this team together," Nico had said when Lewis arrived at the factory in Brackley, England. They had hugged like the old friends they were. The Mercedes mechanics had watched curiously. Two friends now wearing the same silver race suits. The 2013 season had been challenging but promising. Lewis won a race in Hungary. Nico won in Monaco and Britain. They pushed each other in a positive way, celebrating each other's successes. They still had dinners together sometimes, though not as often as before. Being teammates made things different, but they tried to keep their friendship alive. Then everything changed in 2014. Mercedes built an incredible car, far better than Ferrari, Red Bull, or any other team. Suddenly, instead of fighting for occasional wins, they were fighting for championships. And only one could win. Lewis returned to his apartment and showered. As he made breakfast, he thought about how quickly their relationship had fallen apart once real success was possible. The first cracks appeared in Bahrain 2014. They had battled wheel to wheel for the lead, pushing the limits of what the team allowed. Lewis won that day, but something had changed. The competition between them had become more intense, more personal. Then came Monaco. Lewis had been faster all weekend, but in the final qualifying session, Nico went off the track, causing yellow flags that forced Lewis to slow down. Nico took pole position and won the race. Lewis had been convinced it was a deliberate move, a way to cheat him out of pole position. Nico had denied it, but the trust between them was broken. Later that season at Spa, they collided while racing. Lewis got a puncture and had to retire. Nico finished second. In a tense team meeting afterward, Nico admitted he could have avoided the contact but chose not to make a point. Lewis remembered how betrayed he had felt in that moment. Ross Brawn, their team boss at the time, had been furious. Toto Wolff and Niki Lauda, the team leaders, had struggled to keep peace between them. From then on, the Mercedes garage felt like it had a wall down the middle. Engineers were careful not to share one driver's information with the other, Lewis. And Nico stopped talking except when absolutely necessary for the team. The friends who had once shared dreams were now bitter rivals who couldn't stand to be in the same room. Lewis won the 2014 championship, but the victory felt hollow without the friendship that had once meant so much to him. The 2015 season was more of the same, though Lewis was stronger, winning the championship more decisively. He hoped Nico would accept that he was the better driver, and maybe they could repair some of the damage to their relationship. Instead, 2016 brought the worst tensions yet. Lewis remembered how hard that year had been, not just professionally, but personally. The final breakdown of a friendship that had once seemed unbreakable. With a sigh, Lewis took the letter from his bedside drawer and sat down to read more. What happened in Monaco 2014 wasn't what you think. I didn't deliberately crash to get pole position, but I wasn't completely honest about it either. The truth is more complicated. Lewis frowned. What did that mean? He read on. I was pushing too hard, trying to match your time. I made a genuine mistake at Mirabeau Corner, but when I saw the benefit it gave me, causing the yellow flags that slowed you down, I didn't feel as bad as I should have. I didn't plan it, but I didn't regret it either. I let everyone believe it was just a racing incident when I knew, in my heart, it was my fault. That was the beginning of our real problems. I could see you didn't believe me, and instead of trying harder to explain, I got defensive. I started seeing you as an enemy rather than a friend. Everything became about beating you, at any cost. Lewis's hands tightened on the paper. After all these years, Nico was admitting what he had suspected, that he had taken advantage of the situation even if he hadn't planned it. The worst was Spa that year. When we touched wheels, I really could have given you more space. I was angry about previous races and wanted to show I wouldn't back down. I didn't expect you to get a puncture, but I also didn't avoid the contact when I could have. When I admitted in the meeting that I made a point, I saw something break in your eyes. I knew our friendship was over, but I was too proud to try to fix it. Lewis put down the letter and walked to his window. The Monaco street circuit stretched below him, the scene of so much history between them. He remembered the coldness between them in 2016, the year Nico finally won the championship. It had been a difficult season for Lewis. Mechanical problems had plagued his car. The team dynamics had been terrible. Every race weekend felt tense and exhausting. When Nico won the championship and then immediately announced his retirement, Lewis had felt cheated, not just of the title, but of the chance to beat Nico the following year and set things right. Lewis picked up the letter again and continued reading. I need to confess what really happened during the 2016 season. Lewis's heart raced. What more could there be to confess? What had Nico done that Lewis didn't already know about? He continued reading. The 2016 season was the lowest point of my racing career. Maybe my life. I was determined to win at any cost. I knew it might be my last chance to beat you. You are, the more naturally talented driver. And we both knew it. I had to work twice as hard just to keep up. What you don't know is how far I went to gain advantages. I started a whispering campaign within the team. I built relationships with mechanics on your side of the garage and subtly gathered information about your car setup. I shared selective bits with my engineers while making it seem like my own insights. The worst was Spain. Our crash on the first lap wasn't just a racing incident. I had deliberately changed my engine mode against team instructions. When you tried to pass me, I made a sudden defensive move I knew was too late. I gambled that neither of us would finish, rather than let you win again. When we both crashed out, I felt guilty, but also relieved. Lewis stood up abruptly, almost knocking over his coffee mug. The Spanish Grand Prix crash had been a major turning point. Both Mercedes cars eliminated on the first lap, their wreckage scattered across the track. Lewis had been devastated, believing he could have avoided it if he'd been more careful. Now, years later, he learned it had been deliberate. He walked around his living room, trying to process this revelation. His anger felt fresh, as if it had happened yesterday. After several minutes, he sat down and forced himself to keep reading. Your mechanical failures that year weren't just bad luck. I had discovered that certain driving techniques put more stress on the engine components. My engineers warned me about it, so I changed my driving style. I never told anyone that the same issue would affect your car if you weren't informed. I watched as you faced breakdown after breakdown while my car ran perfectly. In Abu Dhabi, the final race, when you tried backing me into other drivers, I understood your desperation. I would have done the same. But by then, I had already decided that if I won the championship, I would retire immediately. I couldn't face another year of being the person I'd become. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Lewis put down the letter, memories of the 2016 season flooding back. The confusion and frustration of his car breaking down race after race. The buys, tension in team meetings, the suspicious glances between crew members. It all made sense now. He remembered the final race in Abu Dhabi. He had won, but it wasn't enough. Nico finished second, securing the championship. On the podium, they had barely looked at each other. The team celebration was awkward, divided, between celebrating Nico's championship and Lewis's race win. Days later, Nico announced his retirement. The press called it a fairy tale ending, winning the championship and walking away on top. Lewis had been shocked and angry. It felt like running away from a fight. Lewis picked up the letter again. I retired because I couldn't bear another year of being that version of myself. The championship felt hollow. I had achieved my life's dream, but lost myself in the process. I told everyone it was to spend time with my family. That was partly true, but it wasn't the whole story. I couldn't face you knowing what I'd done. I've watched you continue to win championships, break records, and become the greatest driver in F1 history. You deserved each victory. Maybe you would have won in 2016 too, if I had competed fairly. We'll never know, and I have to live with that. Outside, rain began to fall. Lewis watched the drops slide down his window, distorting the view of Monaco below. The letter was forcing him to revisit the most painful period of his career, but it was also answering questions that had bothered him for years. He thought about what might have been. If they had remained friends while competing, they could have pushed each other to be better while maintaining respect. The team wouldn't have been divided. Maybe Lewis would have 8 championships now instead of 7. But there was more to life than championships. Lewis had grown from those difficult years. He had become more focused, more resilient. He had found his voice on social issues. He had learned who his true friends were. He returned to the letter, nearing its end. I don't expect forgiveness, Lewis. What I did goes beyond normal competition. But watching my daughters grow up has changed me. Vivian is almost 10 now, and I want her to be proud of her father. I'm teaching her about honesty and integrity. But how can I do that while hiding the truth about my past? I've started a project documenting my F1 career for them. When I reached 2016, I couldn't write the sanitized version anymore. I need to own my mistakes. You deserve to know the truth. Not for reconciliation. I don't expect that. But because you earned your place in history fair and square, while I took shortcuts that haunt me still. There's more I need to tell you, but a letter isn't enough. If you're willing to hear, though, rest, I'll be at the Monaco GP next month. If not, I understand, and I won't bother you again. The letter ended simply. Nico. Lewis set it down and exhaled slowly. His phone buzzed with messages, but he ignored them. After all these years, Nico had finally told the truth. Not for forgiveness, but for his own conscience, for his daughters. The Monaco Grand Prix was 3 weeks away. Did Lewis want to hear more? Or was it better to leave the past buried? His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Mercedes. Current problems needed his attention. The past would have to wait, at least for now. Lewis, we've analyzed yesterday's data, said Bono, his race engineer since 2013. The rear suspension isn't responding how we expected. We need you at the simulator tomorrow. I'll be there, Lewis promised, grateful for the distraction. The next morning, Lewis flew to England on his private jet. As the plane rose above the clouds, he thought about how much had changed since those early days with Nico. After Nico's retirement, Lewis had found a different kind of peace at Mercedes. His new teammate, Valtteri Bottas, had been supportive and uncomplicated. There was competition, but not the bitter rivalry he'd experienced with Nico. Lewis had won championship after championship, breaking Michael Schumacher's seemingly unbeatable records. Now, in 2025, he had a new teammate in young George Russell, another British driver who looked up to Lewis. The team dynamic was positive, built on mutual respect rather than suspicion. At the factory in Brackley, Lewis spent hours in the simulator, working with engineers to solve their suspension problems. The focus felt good. A reminder that despite Nico's letter, Lewis had moved forward, while Nico had stepped away. That evening, he had dinner with Angela Cullen, his physiotherapist and close friend for many years. "You seem distracted," Angela said, pushing her salad around her plate. Testing not go well? Lewis trusted Angela completely. She had been with him through many ups and downs. "I got a letter from Nico," he admitted. Angela's eyebrows shot up. "Rosberg? What did he want?" Lewis summarized the letter. Angela listened intently, her face showing surprise and then anger. "That's unbelievable," she said when he finished. "How do you feel about it?" Lewis sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is angry. He basically cheated his way to that championship. But another part of me respects that he finally told the truth. Are you going to meet him at Monaco?" "I haven't decided yet." "Would you?" Angela thought for a moment. "I'd want to hear what else he has to say. You've carried questions about 2016 for years. Maybe this is your chance for real answers." Lewis nodded. Angela was right. Despite all his success since then, the 2016 season remained an unresolved wound. The following weeks were busy with race preparations. Lewis threw himself into training, working with charity projects and developing his fashion line. On the surface, life continued normally. But Nico's letter was never far from his thoughts. Lewis had changed a lot since their rivalry. Racing was still his passion, but he had found his voice beyond the track. He spoke out about racial injustice, pushed Formula One to address its environmental impact, and started Mission 44, his foundation to increase diversity in motorsport. He wasn't the same person who had been so wounded by Nico's betrayal. He had grown, finding purpose beyond winning races. Yet reading that letter had brought back feelings he thought were long buried. One evening, Lewis called his father, Anthony. From childhood, his dad had been his rock, working multiple jobs to support Lewis's racing dreams. "Dad, what would you do?" Lewis asked, after explaining about the letter. Anthony was quiet for a moment. "You know, Lewis, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from carrying that anger." "I'm not sure I can forgive him," Lewis admitted. "Then go and listen. Not for him, but for yourself. Get the answers you've needed. Then decide." 2 days before the Monaco Grand Prix, Lewis OE was back in his apartment, preparing for the race weekend. He took out Nico's letter and read it again from the beginning. The anger was still there, but less intense now. Curiosity was taking its place. What more could Nico possibly have to tell him? The letter had already revealed so much. What was left? Lewis walked to his balcony and looked out at the Monaco circuit. So many memories were embedded in those streets. Victories, defeats, and the broken friendship that had once meant everything. He had achieved more than they had ever dreamed of as karting kids. 7 world championships, the most race wins in history, a knighthood, global recognition beyond racing. If anyone had told teenage Lewis what his future held, he wouldn't have believed it. Yet despite all that success, there remained an unfinished chapter. The Nico chapter. Maybe it was time to close it properly. Lewis made his decision. He would meet with Nico during the Monaco weekend. Not for Nico's sake, but for his own. To get answers. To understand fully what had happened. He reached for his phone and composed a short message. "I'll hear what you have to say. Friday, after practice. My motorhome." He hit send before he could change his mind. The response came quickly. "Thank you. I'll be there." Lewis took a deep breath. He didn't know what would come from this meeting, but he knew one thing. It was time to face the past so he could fully embrace his future. The Monaco Grand Prix weekend arrived with its usual buzz of excitement. Celebrities filled the harbor on their luxury yachts. The narrow streets were transformed into the world's most glamorous racetrack. For most drivers, Monaco was special. For Lewis, who lived there, it was home. Friday morning practice went well. The Mercedes performed better than expected around Monaco's tight corners. Lewis was fastest, with Max Verstappen's Red Bull close behind. The suspension changes they'd worked on had paid off. As Lewis climbed out of his car in the garage, he glanced across the paddock. There, standing with the Sky Sports TV crew, was Nico. Their eyes met briefly before Lewis turned away. Even that small contact sent a jolt through him. "Good session," said Toto Wolff, clapping Lewis on the shoulder. "Your sector 2 times were impressive." Lewis nodded, only half listening. Later today, he would finally hear what else Nico had to confess. After the debrief with his engineers, Lewis returned to his motorhome in the paddock. These luxury mobile homes were the driver's private spaces during race weekends. Lewis's was decorated with artwork and photos that made it feel like a small piece of home. At precisely 4 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Lewis's stomach tightened as he opened it. Nico stood there, looking nervous. His blonde hair was shorter than during his racing days, and he wore casual clothes rather than team gear. 9 years had passed since his retirement, but he still looked fit. "Lewis," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Lewis gestured for him to enter without speaking. They sat in the small living area, an uncomfortable silence between them. "Your practice times looked good," Nico finally said. The car is working well? We're not here to discuss my car, Louis replied flatly. You said there was more you needed to tell me. So tell me. Nico nodded, taking a deep breath. I tried to explain in the letter, but some things need to be said face to face. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What I didn't write was that, during our final year as teammates, I worked with a sports psychologist. Most drivers do, Louis said, unsure where this was going. This was different. She specialized in psychological warfare, mental tactics used in high-pressure competitions. I went to her because I knew I couldn't beat you on pure talent. Nico looked down at his hands. She taught me techniques to get under your skin, to destabilize you. Louis felt a chill. What techniques? It started with small things, making comments to the press that I knew would bother you, timing my garage entrance to interrupt your engineer briefings, taking longer than necessary when we had to do promotional events together. Louis remembered those irritations, how they had built up over time. But it became more calculated, Nico continued. I deliberately exaggerated incidents when talking to team management, making it seem like you were being more aggressive than you were. This created tension between you and Toto, which I hoped would affect your driving. Louis's jaw tightened. Go on. The worst part was the media manipulation. I had connections with certain journalists. I would feed them stories through third parties, never directly, about your partying or suggesting you weren't focused on racing. I knew how much public criticism affected you. Louis stood up abruptly and walked to the window. He remembered the wave of negative press during that season, stories questioning his commitment, his lifestyle, his focus. He'd always suspected they came from somewhere inside the team. You leaked stories to the press about me? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Not directly, but yes, I made sure certain narratives reached the media. It was calculated and deliberate. Nico's voice was steady but filled with regret. The sports psychologist called it controlled destabilization. I called it winning at any cost. Louis turned to face him. Why are you telling me this now? What do you want from me? Nothing, Nico said simply. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But you deserved to know the truth. All of it. Why now, though? It's been 9 years, Nico sighed. Honestly? My daughters. Vivian is 10. Nayla is 8. They're getting to the age where they understand what I did in my career. They've seen videos of our battles. They ask about you. He paused. I want them to know their father as someone who owns his mistakes and tries to make things right. Louis sat back down, studying Nico's face. There was no deception there, only genuine regret. The championship. Did it feel worth it? Louis asked. Was it worth destroying our friendship and doing all those things? Nico shook his head slowly. No, not in the end. When I won, there was relief, not joy. I'd achieved my life's goal but lost myself in the process. That's why I retired immediately. I couldn't face doing it all again. I couldn't face you. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past between them. After I retired, Nico continued, I tried to pretend it was all normal racing rivalry. I became a TV commentator, a YouTube personality, painting myself as this cool, calm champion. But every time I analyzed one of your races, every time I had to say your name, I felt like a fraud. Louis had noticed Nico's career as a pundit. He'd avoided watching those segments, changing the channel whenever Nico appeared. I haven't slept well for years, Nico admitted. Not because I won, you've won plenty yourself, but because of how I won. Writing that letter was the first step toward being honest. This conversation is the next step. Lewis leaned back in his chair, processing everything he'd heard. The confessions went beyond what he'd imagined, not just taking advantage of situations, but creating them. Psychological warfare, media manipulation, a coordinated campaign to break him down mentally. "I don't know what to say," Lewis finally responded. "Part of me wants to throw you out of here. Another part appreciates your honesty, even if it's years too late." "I understand," Nico said. "I'd feel the same." He stood up, apparently ready to leave. "That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for listening." As Nico moved toward the door, Lewis found himself asking, "Do you think you could have beaten me fairly?" Nico stopped and turned. A sad smile crossed his face. "On my very best day, if everything aligned perfectly, maybe. But consistently, over a season, no. You're the most naturally gifted driver I've ever seen. I always knew that, even when we were kids." The admission hung in the air between them. After a moment, Nico reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. "I found this recently," he said, handing it to Lewis. "Thought you might want it." It was a faded photo of two teenage boys in carts, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning widely at the camera. On the back was written, "Lewis and Nico, Italian Championship, 2000, friends forever." "Keep it," Lewis said, handing it back. "As a reminder." Nico nodded, understanding the message. Some things couldn't be fixed with an apology, no matter how sincere. Goodbye, Lewis. Good luck this weekend. As the door closed behind Nico, Lewis sat motionless. The full truth was finally out. And it was worse than he'd imagined. Yet somehow, knowing everything brought a strange sense of validation. He hadn't been paranoid. His instincts had been right all along. Lewis picked up his phone to call the IV. One person who would understand exactly how he felt right now, his father. "Dad? You got a minute?" Lewis asked when Anthony answered. "For you?" "Always," Anthony replied. His voice immediately calmed Lewis, as it had since childhood. "How's Monaco treating you?" "The car's good. Practice went well." Lewis paused. "I just finished talking with Nico." "Ah," Anthony said, understanding immediately. "And how did that go?" Lewis told his father everything. The psychological warfare, the media manipulation, Nico's confession about why he'd retired so suddenly. Anthony listened without interrupting. "And now I don't know how to feel," Lewis finished. "Part of me wants to be angry. Part of me just feels, I don't know, sad about the whole thing." "That's natural," Anthony said. "You two were like brothers once." Lewis sighed. "It's not just that. It's learning that my instincts were right all along. Everyone thought I was being paranoid or making excuses, but I knew something wasn't right." "You always had good instincts," Anthony agreed. "So what are you going to do now?" "What do you mean?" "Well, you have this information. Does it change anything? Do you want it to?" Lewis thought about this. "I don't know if it changes anything. We can't go back and redo 2016. He still won that championship." "True, but this isn't really about the championship anymore, is it? It's about you finding peace with what happened." Lewis gazed out his motorhome window at the busy paddock beyond. His father was right. At this point in his career, one more championship wouldn't define his legacy. But carrying this anger and hurt might. "I don't know if I can forgive him," Lewis admitted. "Nobody's asking you to," Anthony said. "Forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. But ask yourself this: who suffers more from holding on to this anger, Nico Who's moved on with his life? Or you? Still carrying it around? Louis let those words sink in. His father had always had a way of cutting through the noise to what really mattered. "I need to think about it," Louis said finally. "That's all." "Anyone can ask," Anthony replied. "Now go focus on your race. That's something you can control." After hanging up, Louis tried to turn his attention back to race preparation, but his mind kept returning to Nico's confessions. He messaged Angela Cullen, asking if she could stop by. Angela arrived 30 minutes later. She had been Louis's physiotherapist, trainer, and confidant for years. She knew him better than almost anyone. "You look troubled," she said as she entered. Louis filled her in on the meeting with Nico. Unlike his father, Angela's reaction was less philosophical and more protective. "What a calculating thing to do," she said angrily. "Using psychological tactics and media manipulation, that crosses the line." "I know," Louis agreed. "But in a way, it's almost a relief to know I wasn't imagining things. I always felt something was off that season." Angela studied him carefully. "This isn't just about validation, though, is it? It's about what you do with this information now." Louis nodded. "I keep thinking about what my dad said, that holding on to anger only hurts me in the end." "He's not wrong," Angela admitted. "I've watched you grow so much since those days. You've become not just a better driver, but a better person. More centered, more focused on what really matters." She was right. Louis had changed in the years since his bitter rivalry with Nico. He had found purpose beyond racing, fighting for diversity, environmental causes, animal rights. He had developed interests outside F1, fashion, music, other business ventures. His perspective had widened. "What would the Louis of today do?" Angela asked. Not the Louis from 2016 who was hurt and angry, but who you are now. It was a good question. Louis took his time answering. "I think I need to process this properly. Not push it down like I did before." Angela nodded approvingly. "That's growth right there. The old Louis might have channeled it all into anger on the track." "I still might do that," Louis said with a small smile. "A little anger can be useful in racing." They both laughed, breaking the tension. "Seriously, though," Angela said. "However, you decide to handle this. Make sure it's what's right for you, not what Nico needs or what others expect. What brings you peace?" After Angela left, Louis went for a walk through Monaco. The streets were busy with Grand Prix preparations, but locals recognized him and respectfully gave him space. He found himself at a quiet spot overlooking the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the water with orange and gold. Luxury yachts lined the harbor, many with celebrities on board for the race weekend. Louis barely noticed. His mind was replaying moments from his years with Nico, the good and the bad. He remembered their karting days, sharing hotel rooms and dreaming big dreams. He remembered the pride they'd both felt when they reached Formula One. He remembered the exact moment in 2014 when he first suspected Nico was not playing fair, and the cold feeling that had settled in his stomach. Louis realized that he had never properly processed the end of their friendship. He had channeled everything into winning more championships, proving himself over and over. But he had never really dealt with the personal hurt. Now, with Nico's full confession, he had a choice. He could let the anger consume him, or he could acknowledge it and find a way forward, not for Nico's sake, but for his own. As darkness fell over Monaco, Louis made his way back to his apartment. Tomorrow was qualifying day. He needed to focus. But something had shifted inside him. The weight of uncertainty had lifted. Even if he wasn't ready to forgive, at least now he knew the full truth. That night, Lewis slept better than he had in weeks. When his alarm went off early the next morning, he felt clear-headed and determined. Whatever happened with Nico and their complicated past, one thing was certain: Lewis Hamilton still had races to win and records to break. He got up, ready to face the day, the race, and maybe even his past. The Monaco qualifying session went better than expected. Lewis secured second place on the grid, just behind Max Verstappen's Red Bull. In Monaco, where overtaking was nearly impossible, starting on the front row gave him a real chance at victory. "Great job today," Toto said, clapping him on the back after qualifying. "You're looking more focused than I've seen you in weeks." Lewis nodded, not mentioning that his newfound clarity might have something to do with finally confronting the ghosts of 2016. The team celebrated with their usual post-qualifying debrief, planning strategy for tomorrow's race. Later that evening, Lewis had promised to attend a charity gala at the Fairmont Hotel. It was for a good cause, raising money for children's education in Africa, but he wasn't in the mood for small talk with celebrities and sponsors. Still, he had given his word. So at 8 o'clock sharp, he arrived at the hotel in a custom-designed black suit. The ballroom was filled with the usual Monaco Grand Prix weekend crowd: drivers, team bosses, celebrities, and the super rich who followed Formula One as a hobby. Lewis made his way through the room, shaking hands and posing for photos. Years of fame had taught him how to be present while keeping part of himself private. He was speaking with a film director about a possible documentary when he saw Nico across the room. Their eyes met over the crowd. Nico was with his wife Vivian and their 2 daughters. The girls were dressed in pretty party dresses, looking excited to be at an adult event. Lewis felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had never really known Nico's daughters. They had been born after the friendship had already soured. In another life, he might have been Uncle Lewis to them. Excusing himself from the conversation, Lewis made his way to the bar. He needed a moment to collect his thoughts. As he waited for his sparkling water, he felt a presence beside him. "Lewis," Nico said quietly, "I didn't know you'd be here tonight." "It's for a good cause," Lewis replied, his voice formal. "Your daughters have grown a lot since I last saw photos." Nico smiled proudly. "Yes, they're growing too fast. Vivian is into horseback riding now. Nayla wants to try karting." "Karting?" Lewis couldn't help but be interested. "Following in your footsteps?" "She says she wants to be the first Rosberg woman to win a championship," Nico said with a small laugh. "I told her about you, you know, about how we used to race together as kids." Lewis nodded stiffly, unsure how to respond. The small talk felt wrong after yesterday's heavy conversation. "This is awkward," Nico admitted. "Maybe we could step outside for a minute. There's a terrace with fewer people." Against his better judgment, Lewis found himself following Nico through the glass doors to a terrace overlooking the harbor. The fresh air was a relief after the crowded ballroom. They stood side by side at the railing, looking out at the yachts lit up against the night sky. "Good qualifying today," Nico said eventually. "The car looks quick." "It is," Lewis replied. Then, wanting to move past the racing small talk, he asked, "What did you tell your daughters about me? About us?" Nico looked surprised at the direct question. "The truth. That we were best friends as teenagers. That we both made it to Formula One like we always dreamed. That we became rivals and stopped being friends." He paused. "I didn't tell them the rest yet. What I told you yesterday. They're too young to understand." "And when they're older?" "I'll tell them everything," Nico said firmly. "That's why I wanted to talk to you first. I'm trying to teach them about honesty. And taking responsibility for mistakes. I can't do that if I'm hiding my own past. Lewis studied Nico's face. In the moonlight, he could still see traces of the teenager he had once known so well. "You've changed," Lewis observed. "Fatherhood changes." "You," Nico replied, "makes you see yourself differently. The man I was in 2016, I don't like him very much. I was so focused on winning that I lost sight of everything else." Lewis nodded slowly. "I understand the pressure, the need to win at all costs. But you never crossed the lines I did," Nico pointed out. "That's the difference between us. You're a true champion, Lewis. I was just desperate to be one once." There was no self-pity in Nico's voice, just a clear-eyed assessment of the past. For the first time, Lewis felt the anger inside him begin to soften slightly. "Do you miss racing?" Lewis asked. "Sometimes. The pure driving, yes. The politics and pressure, no." Nico looked back toward the ballroom where his family waited. "I've found other things now. Commentary, my YouTube channel, business investments, and most importantly, being present for my girls." They fell silent, the sounds of the party floating out from the ballroom. "Lewis," Nico said finally, "I don't expect us to be friends again. Too much has happened. But I hope that maybe, with time, we can at least be at peace with our history." Lewis thought about what his father had said about holding on to anger, about who it hurt more in the end. "I'm not there yet," Lewis admitted, "but I appreciate your honesty, even if it came years too late." Nico nodded, accepting this. "That's fair. More than fair, actually." They stood in silence a moment longer. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it wasn't as tense as before. "I should get back to my family," Nico said eventually. "And I should make the rounds," Lewis agreed. "Still have sponsor obligations." As they turned to go back inside, Lewis found himself asking, "Why did you really retire, Nico? Was it just because you couldn't face doing it all again?" Nico paused, his hand on the door. "Partly that, but also," he hesitated, "I knew 2016 was my one chance. Everything aligned perfectly. Some luck with your mechanical issues, my own peak performance, and, yes, the psychological tactics. I knew I'd never be able to repeat it, not against you. Better to leave on top than spend years trying and failing to beat you again." It was perhaps the most honest thing Nico had ever said to him. Lewis felt a strange sense of vindication hearing it. "Good luck tomorrow," Nico said, as they re-entered the ballroom. "Thanks," Lewis replied, and meant it. They parted ways, Nico returning to his family, Lewis moving back into the crowd of guests. The brief conversation hadn't resolved everything. Far from it. But for the first time since receiving that letter, Lewis felt like he could eventually find peace with the past. As he made his way through the party, Lewis found himself standing a little taller, breathing a little easier. Tomorrow's race, suddenly, seemed more important than yesterday's wounds. The Monaco Grand Prix unfolded dramatically the next day. Lewis battled Max Verstappen for 40 laps around the tight circuit, but overtaking proved impossible. He finished second, a strong result, but not the victory he wanted. Still, his mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. "Great drive today," George Russell told him after the race. As his teammate, George had finished fourth. "You seem different this weekend, more focused." Lewis simply nodded. He wasn't ready to share the story of Nico's letter with many people, yet. 2 weeks later, back at Mercedes headquarters in Brackley, Toto Wolff called Lewis into his office. The Austrian team principal looked unusually hesitant. "Lewis, I have something to discuss with you," Toto began. "It's a bit delicate." Lewis sat down. "What's up?" Sky Sports is planning a special feature for the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. It's the 10th anniversary of the most intense season of the Mercedes rivalry. You and Nico in 2016. Lewis felt his body tense. And they want to do a joint interview with both of you. Looking back at that season, how it shaped Formula One, the legacy it left. No, Lewis said immediately. I'm not interested. Toto nodded, clearly having expected this response. I understand. I told them you'd probably decline. But what? Nico has already agreed to participate. And he specifically said he would understand if you didn't want to join. Lewis frowned. He didn't like the idea of Nico telling the story of 2016 without him there to give his perspective. I'll think about it, he said finally. But I'm leaning toward no. Lewis left Toto's office with a storm of emotions. The last thing he wanted was to revisit 2016 in front of cameras. Yet the conversation with Nico at the gala had shifted something inside him. Maybe there was value in addressing the past publicly. That evening, Lewis received a call from Will Buxton, the respected F1 journalist who would be conducting the interview if Lewis agreed. I know you're hesitant, Will said after explaining the concept in more detail. But this isn't about stirring up old drama. It's about showing how two great champions have evolved and moved forward. I appreciate that, Will, but this isn't just sports rivalry to me. It was personal. I understand, Will replied, which is exactly why your voice should be part of this story. After hanging up, Lewis went for a long run to clear his head. The British Grand Prix at Silverstone was his home race, the event he looked forward to most each year. He had won it 8 times, a record. The fans there had supported him through every up and down of his career. Did he want this interview hanging over his Silverstone weekend? But then again, did he want Nico speaking about their rivalry without him present? The next day at the factory, Lewis ran into George in the simulator room. His younger teammate was reviewing data from the previous race. Heard about the Sky interview request? George asked. News travels fast, Lewis remarked. Toto told you? He mentioned it, George admitted. Wanted my perspective as your teammate. And what did you tell him? George hesitated. I said it might be good for you to face it head-on. I've never seen you run from a challenge on track. Why start now? Lewis considered this. George had a point. Throughout his career, Lewis had faced criticism, racism, and doubt head-on. He had never hidden from difficult conversations. There's something else, George added. They're planning to make it a charity event. Ticket sales for the live interview would go to a foundation of your choice. This caught Lewis's attention. His Mission 44 Foundation, created to support underrepresented groups in motorsport, was always looking for funding opportunities. I didn't know that part, Lewis said. Just something to consider, George replied, turning back to the simulator. Data. For the next few days, Lewis went back and forth on his decision. He spoke again with his father, who advised him to do what felt right, not what others expected. Angela thought he should decline and focus on the race. Toto remained neutral, saying Mercedes would support whatever he decided. As the Silverstone weekend drew closer, Lewis found himself thinking about legacy. Not just his racing achievements, but how he handled the difficult moments. Would avoiding this interview seem like he was still hurt by what happened? Or would participating show he had truly moved beyond it? 3 days before they were due to travel to Silverstone, Sky needed a final answer. Lewis sat in his home office, staring at the email requesting his decision. On his wall hung photographs from his career, his first win in Canada, his championships, special moments at Silverstone with the British fans. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Whatever you decide about the interview, I'll respect it. No pressure. Nico, Lewis stared at the message. It was the first direct communication from Nico since their conversation on the terrace in Monaco. He thought about the young boys they had been, racing karts, dreaming of Formula One. He thought about the bitter rivals they had become, and he thought about the men they were now, both changed by time, success, and failure. Lewis hit reply on the email from Sky. I'll do the interview on one condition. All proceeds go to Mission 44, my foundation supporting diversity in motorsport. Within minutes, they responded. Agreed. Thank you, Lewis. Lewis texted Toto next. I'm in for the Sky interview, but I'm doing it my way. His decision made, Lewis felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. He didn't know how the interview would go or how he would feel sitting beside Nico discussing their contentious past, but he knew that hiding from it wasn't the answer. As Lewis packed for Silverstone, he placed Nico's letter in his bag. He didn't know if he would need it, but having it with him felt right. After years of avoiding the full truth of what happened, in 2016, he was finally ready to face it, not just privately, but in front of the world. The Silverstone weekend would be about more than just another race now. It would be about facing the past while looking toward the future. Lewis arrived at Silverstone on Thursday morning. The British summer was in full force, sunny skies, and a gentle breeze carrying the sounds of cars being unloaded and garages being set up. This track held special meaning for Lewis. It was where he'd watched his first Formula One race as a child, dreaming that someday he'd be out there too. News of the interview with Nico had spread quickly through the paddock. Journalists asked about it during the Thursday press conference. Yes, I'll be sitting down with Nico to discuss our time as teammates, Lewis confirmed. It's been years since those events. I think we both have perspective now that we didn't have then. The interview was scheduled for Friday evening after practice sessions in Silverstone's conference center. Tickets had sold out within hours of the announcement, with all proceeds going to Mission 44. Lewis tried to focus on his practice sessions, but his mind kept returning to the upcoming interview. What would Nico say? How would Lewis react? Would old anger resurface in front of hundreds of fans and cameras? Your times are good, Bono, his race engineer, reassured him after the second practice. P2, just 2/10 behind Ferrari. Don't worry about tonight. Just be yourself. Back in the Mercedes hospitality area, Lewis was surprised to see Toto deep in conversation with Nico. Seeing them together brought back memories of team meetings years ago, tension filling the room as the two drivers avoided eye contact. Lewis, Toto called, waving him over. Nico was just telling me about the format for tonight. Nico looked nervous, but determined. Will Buxton wants to start with our karting days, then move through our early F1 years, Mercedes partnership, and finally 2016. Does that work for you? Lewis nodded stiffly. Fine with me. I have team commitments until 6:30, so I'll meet you. There. Perfect, Nico replied. And Lewis? Thank you for agreeing to do this. I know it wasn't an easy decision. After Nico left, Toto placed a hand on Lewis's shoulder. You're sure about this? Not really, Lewis admitted, but it feels necessary somehow. At 7:30 p.m. sharp, Lewis entered the packed conference center. The audience was a mix of fans, team personnel, and media. A stage had been set up with 3 chairs, one for Will Buxton in the middle, and one each for Lewis and Nico on either side. Nico was already seated when Lewis arrived. The audience applauded as Lewis made his way to the stage. He shook Will's hand then, after a brief hesitation, Nico's as well. Good evening, everyone, Will began once the applause died down. Tonight we have a rare opportunity to hear from two Formula One champions whose rivalry defined an era of the sport. Lewis, Nico, thank you both for being here. The interview began with their early days. Photos of two young boys in karts appeared on the screen behind them. "That's Italy, 2000, Nico commented. "We were so young. Sleeping on each other's hotel room floors to save money," Lewis added, surprising himself with the memory. As they discussed their karting years, the tension between them eased slightly. They shared stories about terrible rental cars their fathers drove between races, about stolen go-kart engines they had to recover, about dreams that seemed impossibly large at the time. The audience laughed at their teenage antics. Lewis found himself smiling at memories he hadn't revisited in years. "You two were genuinely friends," Will observed. "When did that start to change?" "Becoming teammates changed everything," Nico explained. "Suddenly, the same car, the same opportunity. No excuses." Lewis nodded. "In different teams, we could support each other. As teammates, every success for one was a failure for the other." The conversation moved to their early years at Mercedes, 2013 when the friendship was strained but intact, then 2014 when the real problems began. "Monaco 2014, Will said, addressing the elephant in the room. "The qualifying incident that many see as the beginning of the end of your friendship. What really happened there?" A hush fell over the audience. This was what everyone had come to hear. Lewis looked at Nico, curious how he would respond publicly. "I made a mistake in qualifying," Nico said carefully. "But I benefited from that mistake when yellow flags came out. Lewis was on a faster lap and had to slow down. I got pole position and won the race." "You always maintained it was an innocent mistake," Will prompted. Nico looked directly at Lewis. "It was a mistake, but my reaction afterward wasn't honest. I was defensive when Lewis questioned it because I knew how it looked. I could have handled it differently." Murmurs spread through the audience. This was more candid than anyone had expected. "Lewis, how did that incident affect your relationship?" Will asked. "Trust is everything in a friendship," Lewis replied. "Once that trust was broken, it was hard to rebuild. We went from friends to rivals to something else entirely." The interview continued through the subsequent flashpoints: Spa 2014, their battles throughout 2015, and finally, the 2016 season. 2016 was the most difficult year of my career, Lewis admitted. Not just because of losing the championship, but because of how it happened. The mechanical failures, the team dynamics, the feeling that things weren't entirely fair. Will turned to Nico. "Would you say you won that championship fair and square?" The audience held its breath. Lewis watched Nico carefully. "I won according to the rules," Nico began slowly. "But looking back now, I'm not proud of everything that happened that season." To Lewis's surprise, Nico continued. "I engaged in psychological tactics that went beyond normal competition. I used media connections to create narratives that would get under Lewis's skin. I wasn't the teammate or friend I should have been." The audience was completely silent now. No one had expected this level of honesty. "Why are you admitting this now?" Will asked, clearly stunned. "Because it's the truth," Nico said simply. "And because I have daughters now who look up to me. I want to teach them about integrity, and that means owning my mistakes." Lewis found himself unexpectedly moved by Nico's public confession. It couldn't have been easy to admit these things in front of hundreds of people and cameras. "Lewis, what's your response to this?" Will asked. Lewis took a deep breath. The answer mattered, not just to those watching, but to himself. "I appreciate Nico's honesty," he began. The truth is, that season cost us both a lot. Not just our friendship, but pieces of ourselves. In the pursuit of winning, we both lost something valuable. Lewis surprised himself with his next words. But looking back now, I can see that the pressure we put on each other made us both better drivers. Without Nico pushing me to my limits, I might not have achieved everything that came after. The interview concluded with reflections on their separate paths since 2016. Lewis's continued success and activism, Nico's business ventures and family life. As they shook hands at the end, the audience gave them a standing ovation, not just for the interview, but for the honesty and growth it represented. Walking off stage, Lewis felt lighter somehow. The past couldn't be changed, but facing it had been more healing than he'd expected. "Thank you," Nico said quietly as they exited. "For agreeing to this, for your honesty up there." "We both needed it, I think," Lewis replied, and he meant it. As they walked back to the paddock, fans called out for autographs and photos. Lewis and Nico signed side by side, something that would have been unimaginable a few weeks ago. "Dad!" a young voice called out. Nico turned to see his daughters running toward him, with Vivian following behind. "You were amazing," his older daughter said, hugging him tightly. Lewis watched the family moment with a strange mix of emotions. He nodded politely to Vivian, who smiled back warmly. "The girls wanted to wish you luck for tomorrow," Nico explained to Lewis. "They're becoming fans." "Thank you," Lewis said, crouching down to their level. "Are you enjoying Silverstone?" "Faranti," girls nodded shyly. The younger one, Nayla, whispered something to her father. "She wants to know if you can show her your car sometime," Nico translated, looking apologetic. Lewis surprised himself by smiling. "Maybe after Sunday's race, if your dad brings you to the garage." The girls' faces lit up, and Lewis felt something shift inside him. Children had a way of putting things in perspective. By the time Lewis returned to his driver room, his phone was buzzing with notifications. Clips from the interview were already spreading across social media. The hashtag Hamilton-Rosberg reunion was trending worldwide. "You did good out there," Angela said when she saw him. "How are you feeling?" "Strange," Lewis admitted, "but not bad. Like putting down a heavy weight I didn't realize I was carrying." Later that night, Lewis read some of the online reactions. Most fans were moved by the honesty shown by both drivers. Some praised Nico's courage in admitting his tactics. Others admired Lewis's maturity in his response. A few die-hard supporters on both sides still argued about 2016, but most seemed to appreciate the human story behind the rivalry. Lewis was surprised to see messages from other drivers. Sebastian Vettel texted, "Powerful interview. Respect to both of you." Fernando Alonso, Lewis's first F1 teammate, and another complicated relationship, simply wrote, "This is how champions behave. Proud of you both." The next morning, Lewis woke up feeling clearer than he had in weeks. Saturday at Silverstone meant qualifying, and Lewis was determined to secure pole position at his home race. The weather forecast predicted rain. Conditions Lewis thrived in. As he walked into the paddock, several team members from other garages nodded respectfully or gave him thumbs up. Word of the interview had spread throughout the F1 community. In the Mercedes garage, Toto pulled him aside. "That was quite something last night. Are you okay?" "Better than okay," Lewis replied. "I feel focused, ready." The qualifying session was dramatic. Rain began falling halfway through Q2, making the track treacherous. Cars slid off at Copse and Beckett's corners. Lewis, as always in the wet, was in his element. He secured pole position by half a second over Max Verstappen, with Charles Leclerc's Ferrari third. In the post-qualifying press conference, a journalist asked if the emotional interview had affected his driving. "Maybe," Lewis acknowledged. "Sometimes, clearing the air helps you focus on what matters. And what matters this weekend is giving the British fans a good show tomorrow." That evening, as Lewis reviewed data with his engineers, Toto interrupted with unexpected news. "Nico asked if he could visit our garage tomorrow before the race," Toto said, his first time back since retiring. "I wanted to check with you before saying yes." Lewis thought about it. "It's fine. He's bringing his daughters, I think. I told them they could see the car." Toto raised an eyebrow. "That's generous of you." Lewis shrugged. Kids shouldn't have to carry their parents' history. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. The Silverstone circuit was packed with fans, many wearing Lewis's merchandise or carrying Sadr 44 flags. British Grand Prix Day was always special, the home crowd's energy giving Lewis an extra boost. As he went through his pre-race routine, Lewis was surprised by how calm he felt. The conversation with Nico seemed to have cleared something that had been clouding his mind for years. True to his word, Nico appeared in the Mercedes garage 2 hours before the race, daughters in tow. The team welcomed their former driver warmly. Lewis watched as George Russell chatted enthusiastically with the girls, showing them the steering wheel and explaining the buttons. When it was Lewis's turn, he knelt down and let them peek inside. His cockpit. "It looks complicated," Nayla said, eyes wide at all the controls. "It is, but you get used to it," Lewis told her. "Just like learning to ride a bike." Before leaving, Nico approached Lewis one last time. "Good luck out there," he said, extending his hand. "Thanks," Lewis replied, shaking it. The gesture felt more natural than it had before. The race itself was one of the most exciting of the season. Lewis got a perfect start from pole, but Max Verstappen challenged him through the first corners. They battled wheel to wheel for several laps before Lewis pulled away. Then came rain, light at first, then heavier. Some drivers pitted for intermediate tires. Others, including Lewis, stayed out on slicks, gambling that the shower would pass. For a few nerve-wracking laps, Lewis fought to keep his car on track, sliding through corners with remarkable control. His gamble paid off. The rain eased, and those who had pitted lost time. Lewis built a comfortable lead over Verstappen and Leclerc. A late safety car, deployed when Kevin Magnussen's Haas crashed at Stowe Corner, bunched the field back together. Lewis faced a 10-lap sprint to the finish with Verstappen right behind. "Him!" The crowd roared as the safety car pulled in. Lewis defended perfectly into the first corner, then gradually pulled away again. He crossed the finish line 3 seconds ahead, securing his 9th British Grand Prix victory, extending his own record. As Lewis performed his victory lap, waving to the fans, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow, there would be more races, more challenges, more rivals. But today, he had faced his past and emerged stronger. And that victory felt even sweeter than the one on track. The Silverstone podium was always special. Unlike other races where only team representatives joined the drivers, here the crowd flooded onto the track below the podium. Thousands of fans cheered as Lewis lifted the trophy, spraying champagne over Max and Charles. "Lewis! Lewis! Lewis!" they chanted, as "God Save the Queen" played in honor of the British winner. In the cool-down room before the ceremony, Max had clapped him on the shoulder. "Something's different about you this weekend. You were impossible to catch." Lewis just smiled. How could he explain that confronting the ghosts of his past had somehow freed him to focus on the present. The post-race press conference was filled with the usual questions about strategy and tire management. Then a journalist from The Guardian asked, "Lewis, many people have been moved by your interview with Nico Rosberg last night. Has that experience affected your mindset this weekend?" Lewis took a moment before answering. "I think in life, not just in racing, we sometimes carry burdens we don't realize we're carrying. When you finally set them down, you feel lighter, faster." He smiled at his own metaphor. "This weekend has been about more than racing for me. It's been about making peace with the past." Another reporter followed up. "Will you and Nico be friends again after this?" "That's complicated," Lewis answered honestly. "We shared something special as kids, then something difficult as rivals. What comes next? I don't know. But I think we've both found a kind of respect again." After fulfilling his media duties, Lewis headed back to the Mercedes hospitality area for the team celebration. Everyone was in high spirits. A win at the home Grand Prix was always cause for extra celebration. As Lewis mingled with team members, Toto approached with an unusual smile. "I have news that might interest you," the team principal said. "Sky's overnight viewing figures for your interview with Nico were the highest for any non-race F1 content in their history. They're calling it a cultural moment." Lewis was surprised. "Really? I didn't think that many people would care about our old rivalry." "It seems they care about the human story," Toto replied. "And speaking of that, Nico left something for you." He handed Lewis an envelope. Inside was a note. "Lewis, thank you for your grace yesterday. There's something else I didn't say publicly that you deserve to know. Call me when you're ready." Nico, Lewis, frowned. What more could there possibly be? That evening, after the team celebration wound down, Lewis returned to his hotel. The rush of winning was giving way to exhaustion, yet he found himself dialing Nico's number. "Lewis," Nico answered immediately. "Congratulations on the win." "Thanks. Your note said there was something else?" "Yes. Something I couldn't say in the interview. It's personal. Too personal for cameras." Lewis sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm listening. The 2016 season?" Nico hesitated. "There was something happening that nobody knew. Not the team, not the media, not even Vivian knew until after I retired." "What are you talking about?" "I was diagnosed with severe anxiety that year. Panic, attacks before races, insomnia that lasted for days. I was falling apart mentally." Lewis was stunned into silence. "The psychological tactics I used against you weren't just about winning," Nico continued. "They were a way to cope with my own demons. If I made you the enemy, made you seem superhuman or unfair, it justified my own extreme measures. It made the anxiety feel useful somehow." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Lewis asked. "Formula One wasn't ready for mental health conversations then. I was afraid of seeming weak, afraid the team would replace me, afraid my father would be disappointed." Lewis thought back to that season, how focused he'd been on his own struggles. He'd never imagined Nico was fighting an internal battle too. "The retirement wasn't just about walking away on top," Nico explained. "It was about saving myself. The night after winning the championship, I had the worst panic attack of my life. I knew I couldn't do another season like that." "I had no idea," Lewis said quietly. "Nobody did. That was the point. But watching you speak so openly about your own struggles in recent years, with racism, with mental health, it made me realize it's time to own my full story." Lewis thought about their rivalry in this new light. Two young men pushing each other, to the limit, one battling his inner demons in silence, the other fighting to overcome obstacles that had been placed in his way. "Thank you for telling me," Lewis said. "It couldn't have been easy." "It's the final piece of the truth you deserved," Nico replied. After they hung up, Lewis stood at his hotel window, looking out at the lights of Silverstone Village in the distance. The revelation had completely reframed their rivalry, not just as a battle between friends-turned-competitors, but as two human beings, each carrying their own heavy burdens. 3 days later, Lewis held a press conference at Mercedes headquarters. With Nico at his side, a sight that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier, they announced a new joint venture, a documentary series exploring their rivalry, friendship, and reconciliation. "This isn't just about racing," Lewis explained to the assembled journalists. "It's about competition, mental health, and finding your way back to what matters." But the bigger announcement came next. Together, they were establishing the Hamilton-Rosberg for Initiative, a foundation to support young racers from disadvantaged backgrounds. "Lewis and I took different paths to reach Formula One," Nico explained. "His family sacrificed everything with limited resources. Mine had connections and financial stability. We want to help level that playing field." As cameras flashed, a reporter asked the inevitable question, "Lewis, have you forgiven Nico for what happened in 2016? Lewis looked at his former rival, now partner in this new venture. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about not letting it control your future," he continued. "We're not the same people we were in 2016. Life has shaped us both, through championships, failures, fatherhood for Nico, activism for me. What matters is who we choose to be today and tomorrow." As they shook hands for the cameras, Lewis felt the final piece of a long journey falling into place. The boyhood friends had become bitter rivals, and now something new entirely. Two men who had found a way to use their shared history to create something positive for the future. The letter that had started it all remained in Lewis's apartment, in Monaco, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected messages can lead to the most important journeys. That was the end of this story. Where are you listening from? If you enjoyed this emotional journey through Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg's complex relationship, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like this one. Don't forget to share with friends and family to spread kindness and awareness about how even the most broken relationships can heal with time, honesty, and growth. Your support helps us continue creating content that explores the human side of sports rivalries and the power of forgiveness.